Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Beth, thanks so much for joining me. Today is my first ever monthly wrap up, which I'm really excited about. I've had this channel now for like 3 or 4 weeks, and yeah, this is my first ever monthly wrap up and I'm excited to get into it. January was a really good reading month for me. I ended up reading 3 books, which is pretty average for me, but yeah, I really enjoyed all of the books I read this month, and as much as it's only 3, I still think I have 2 definite recommendations and 1 semi-recommendation. It wasn't my favourite, but I'm still excited to tell you about it. So without further ado, let's get into the books that I read in January. So the first book I read this year was Penance by Eliza Clark. This is a book that is framed as a true crime book, but it is entirely fictional. It is a novel. It's the sort of book where you'll start reading it and you'll be like, wait, is this actually real? But no, it's completely fictionalized, but it is presented as a true crime book. It even has this bit at the start where it says that the book was initially recalled from shelves because of some controversy, and it has since been re-released with this bit at the start and a bit at the end. So instantly you're going into it thinking, wait, why was it recalled? What is this about? The actual novel is written by Eliza Clark, but in the book that you're reading is written by, I believe it's Alex Corelli, and he is a journalist, but he was kind of shunned from the journalist industry because of a phone hacking scandal, and he has since gone on to write true crime books, and this is one of them. And basically the book follows a girl who was murdered at 16 years old by 3 of her classmates, and the book kind of goes through these separate sections. You kind of have an introduction where it outlines loosely what happens, and you kind of get an idea as to what the events were, but then he goes through each person. I think you have girl A, B, C, and D, and the victim. And I'm pretty sure girl C is the one who actually had nothing to do with it. She was initially seen as a suspect, but they got it wrong. It was actually girl D. I believe that's the way it works, but basically you follow all these different things, and it's kind of done very mixed media, so you'll have podcasts, you'll have interviews, you'll have newspaper articles, you'll have these excerpts where he kind of writes these like prose excerpts based on supposedly what these girls have said to him in interviews. He'll kind of then write a section of like 20 pages of prose where he'll talk you through one of the events that happened based on what the girls have told him already. And it's one of those books where you're just really fascinated to keep reading. I think I read it in about a week, maybe just under. And it was definitely one of the books that I just found myself keep picking up because it was really interesting. And you've kind of also got this element of, do you trust the narrator? Obviously this guy is a shamed journalist and you don't really know if you should trust him or what his intentions are with writing the book. Also, as it kind of progresses, you maybe sense some manipulation, and the way that he treats the people he's interviewing, you're kind of raising your eyebrows as to if his methods are actually appropriate or not. And yeah, I just found it really interesting. It was one of those books where, as much as it is completely fictional, it really did feel like it was real, especially because it's written in that true crime style. I found it quite nostalgic to read because a lot of the girls in the book are around the same age that I am. So it all occurred in 2016 when Brexit happened, and they would talk about playing The Sims and Tumblr posts and all these things that were quite culturally relevant to my teenage years as well. So I did really personally enjoy that aspect of it. I ended up giving this book a 3.5 star rating. I did enjoy it, but I think it went on a little bit too long, and definitely towards the end I felt like it was just doing a little bit too much. It was kind of trying to cover all these different things, and I don't know if it 100% worked all the time. Having said that, I would say it was a really interesting read. I would say if it's on your radar already, I would pick it up, but it wasn't my favourite read, but I did still enjoy it, and I was still glad it was my first read of the year because it was a book that I was very intrigued about the premise and intrigued to see the story. So after that, the next book I read was Down the Drain by Julia Fox, which is Julia Fox's memoir. I did go in with reasonably good expectations because I know I like a celebrity memoir, and I know I like a memoir that has very like hard-hitting themes, and I knew that this did cover some heavier topics. However, I just didn't really know what to expect from it, and I was actually really pleasantly surprised and ended up really loving it. It basically tells Julia's story from when she is a child and she first moves over to the US. She was actually initially raised in Italy and she moved over to the US when she was a child, and it talks about her relationship with her parents and her relationship with drugs and alcohol. And yeah, it was just completely fascinating, the lifestyle that she was living at such a young age. She ends up getting her nipples pierced when she's like 11 years old, and I think that's when she got her first tattoo as well. And I was actually reading it, and you're reading it and you think that she's so much older than she is because she's doing all these things, and then you realise she just says, yeah, and I wasn't even 12 yet, blah blah blah. And I'm just like, what? How are you doing this at 11? But as much as it might seem fascinating, it also is really heartbreaking, because a lot of the reason why she's living this crazy lifestyle and she's doing these things that are well beyond her years is because she doesn't really have that family unit growing up, and she doesn't have that support from her parents. It definitely is a very plot-heavy memoir. There's so much that happens, and it's not even that long of a book, but I feel like it covers so many different eras of her life and so many different lives that she lived. And I did just find it really fascinating. As much as there's kind of like the crazy party girl side of her, especially when she's younger, she also has a really sensitive side, and there's actually some chapters towards the end that are really upsetting and moving. As much as this book has some heavier topics, it also had a great line of humour throughout the entire book, where you could really sense her tone of voice and you could just completely sense who she was as a person. If you also like audiobooks, she does actually narrate the audiobook herself, and I did kind of flip between the two, between reading on my Kindle and listening to on audio. So if you do like audiobooks, this is definitely one to look out for, because she does read it herself. I think this was just the sort of memoir that was just so interesting. I think some celebrity memoirs can feel a bit self-absorbed and at times a little bit boring, and kind of you can tell they're just writing it because they want to write a book and it makes them feel good about themselves. But I feel like Julia's story was genuinely just so interesting to learn about and really heartbreaking. It was kind of like the perfect mix of entertaining, heartbreaking, but ultimately just such an engrossing read. I found myself wanting to read it all the time because I just found her and her story so fascinating. And I think that is what makes such a great memoir, when you have a writer and a person behind it that just has lived such an interesting life. I think what Julia does really well in this book as well is really paints the landscape of New York at the time, which I found really interesting. I've never been to New York, and it's a city that I've never really known much about or really had much interest in. The way that she describes it, especially at the time that she grew up, I did find it just completely fascinating, and felt like New York was also a character in itself, because it felt like she was such an it girl in her local community. And I did really like that aspect of it as well, because I think everyone already thinks that she shot to fame because she was in Uncut Gems, or especially when she started dating Kanye West, but she was already iconic in her own local community, and especially in New York. So I really liked her actually paying homage to that, and really like standing up for herself and saying, look, I've always been the it girl, I've always been iconic. Just because you guys have finally learned who I am doesn't mean that I haven't been around. And I really liked that. I just really liked her personality, and I just have so much respect for her as a woman. I think she's just an absolute fighter, and I really enjoyed the book. I ended up giving it a 4.5 stars because I absolutely loved it. It was one of the best memoirs that I've read in recent years. There definitely were a few bits which I found a little bit TMI, or I didn't quite connect to it, which is why it wasn't personally a 5-star read for me, but I definitely recommend it to anyone who's into their memoirs, especially if you're into these kind of fascinating lifestyles that you can't imagine for yourself. It was very entertaining, and it was just a great read. And then the final book that I read in January was Recursion by Blake Crouch, and this was incredible. This was my first ever sci-fi book, so I really didn't know what to expect, and in all honesty, I didn't know if I was going to like it. I've watched quite a few sci-fi movies, and to be honest, I do enjoy them, but I just thought I was going to find reading a sci-fi book really intimidating. But I'd heard really amazing things. I had actually been recommended it by a friend, and he said it was one of his favourite books. He said he really enjoyed it at the time, so I thought, you know what, I want to broaden my horizons in terms of the sort of genres that I'm reading, and I thought that reading sci-fi was something that I did want to lean a little bit more into and give it a go. And I absolutely loved it. The premise of Recursion is that you have these two characters and you follow essentially both their timelines. And the book starts with Barry, who's a cop in 2018, and he has been sent to talk down someone who's trying to end their life. And he gets sent to the top of the building, he talks to her and asks her why she's doing this, and tries to say, life gets better, you don't need to do this, all this sort of like talking down tactics. And she tells him that she has FMS. And what we find out is that FMS stands for false memory syndrome, and it's a disease that has been affecting social circles where people will essentially have these completely false memories of lives that they've never lived before. So in the case of this woman, she has the memories of having a son, of having a husband, of having a completely different career, living in a completely different location. But it's completely false. She actually went and found the man who was supposedly her husband, and he says that he doesn't even recognise her, doesn't have a clue who she is. And even though she has these really vivid memories of having her son, giving birth to him, doing all those small moments with him, her son never actually existed. She explains this to Barry, and Barry says, well, I know what it's like to lose my daughter. I lost my daughter as well, and I completely understand what you're going through, but you don't need to kill yourself. And she says, yeah, but at least your daughter actually existed. My son never existed. And she does end up jumping off the roof at the end of that chapter. And the chapters are really short, so that's not really spoiling too much. It's only the first sort of like 10 pages. But when I finished that, I was like, okay, let's strap in. This is about to get crazy. The second chapter is from a character called Helena, and she is a scientist, and her chapter is in 2008, so it's 10 years prior to Barry's. And you kind of have this back and forth between that dual perspective of these two characters, and you've got Helena who's working on a science project, and you've got Barry who's trying to work out what is FMS, what is causing it, and is it something that can be prevented. This book just absolutely blew my mind. It is the sort of book where I feel like I give you that premise and I genuinely can't say any more, because it's the sort of book where every time you think it's got to some sort of conclusion, it just completely does a 180 and something else happens, there's a big twist, and you're thrown into a completely different part of the book. I think the book split up into like 5 parts or so, maybe 4, 5, 6, I can't remember the exact number, but it's split up into several parts, and each section is a whole kind of like other part. I think it actually describes them as different books. Obviously they're not different books, it's all the same story, but you really do feel like you're in a whole other era of the story, and it's just absolutely fascinating. It completely blew my mind. I did a mix of listening to it on audio as well as reading it on my Kindle, and the audiobook is really good. So if you're into your audiobooks, I can definitely say that the audiobook is really interesting, and the voice acting is really good for it. As much as there were certain parts, obviously it's a sci-fi, so there were certain parts where I'd just be like, what the hell is going on? But usually the reason why you're thinking what is going on is because the character themselves has no idea what's going on. And then the next chapter, you'll have another character will explain what happened, and you'll kind of get that better understanding as to what's going on. It's definitely not a complex sci-fi, like the themes that they talk about are very much rooted in reality, because the majority of the book takes place in the real world, like it takes place in New York. It's not the sort of book that's doing like space, it's not the sort of book that's doing aliens. It's more to do with this disease that is spreading and trying to figure out what it actually is. I just absolutely adored this book. I ended up giving it a 5-star. I found it completely fascinating, and I remember talking to my friend that had read it, and I was at the halfway point and I literally said to him, I don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, I have another 150 pages and I genuinely don't even think anything else is going to happen now, because it feels like we're getting to the end. Like, famous last words, because literally, I think I said that to him that day, and that evening when I was reading the book, completely different plot line starts coming in, and it just completely changes the entire story, and I just absolutely loved it. It was the sort of book that I found myself wanting to read all the time. I just found it so fascinating. The world building was really good. I love the themes. It has a very philosophical element to it as well as the book progresses. And I'm not going to do any spoilers, but definitely if you've read it, the final sort of like couple of sections of the novel were my absolute favourite. There was kind of like a bit of a, not a subplot because it kind of became the plot of the time, but there was a subplot that I absolutely adored, and I just loved these characters and I loved everything that was going on, and it was the sort of book that just completely kept me guessing. It is a sci-fi, but it definitely falls under the sort of thriller category because it's very fast-paced, it's very action-based. I could definitely imagine it being made into a TV show or a movie because it's very action-driven and very plot-driven. And yeah, if you're looking to dip your toes into sci-fi, I definitely recommend trying out Recursion because I absolutely adored it. It was my first 5-star read of the year. And if you watch my video where I talked about my 5-star reads, I only actually had 2 last year. So the fact that we're in the first month of the year and I've already found 1 is very promising. I'm trying to be a little bit more generous with my 5 stars, and the books that I actually love and can't stop talking about, I'm just saying, look, let's give it a 5-star, because it clearly is a 5-star. This book was just absolutely incredible. I loved it. I loved the characters. I loved the plot. And yeah, I loved the writing. There wasn't really much that I didn't like about it. I just absolutely love this book, and I would definitely recommend to anyone who wants to get into sci-fi, because it's a very easy sci-fi book, and especially if you're into your action-packed thrillers, I think you'll really love this. And yeah, those were the 3 books that I read in January this year. I only read 3, so I understand the video is maybe a little bit shorter than the last couple of videos that I've put out, but I do really want to do these monthly wrap-ups just to let you know what sort of books I'm reading and go into more depth. I am planning on doing a couple of reading vlogs potentially over the next few weeks, and I'm really open to any feedback of the sort of content that you want me to make. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone who has been watching these videos and has supported me so far. I do read all the comments, and I just feel so grateful that I literally only made this channel a few weeks ago and it's already gained so much traction and so much positivity, and I do feel like this is a really lovely space for me, and I just feel really, really grateful for everyone who's subscribed, everyone who's liked, everyone who's commented, all of it. It doesn't go unnoticed, and I really, really am grateful for it all. So thank you so much for all the support that I've received on this channel so far. I am going to have a few more sort of reading vlogs coming soon, and also I'm planning on doing a little bit of some genre breakdowns, so like my 10 favourite literary fictions, my 5 favourite romances, that sort of thing, where I do really break down some books that I've read before starting this channel, because obviously all the books I've read before this channel was created you might not really see many reviews of because I've already read them. I am going to go back and do a few reviews of my backlog, so that's something to look forward to on this channel as well. But please do comment down below if you have any feedback or any video ideas that you really want to see, because I'm completely open to different ideas. And yeah, I do have some ideas in the back of my head, so do keep an eye out, but I'm always open for feedback and always open to see what you guys want to see. And yeah, I just wanted to say a big thank you for watching this video. Thank you for all the support I've received so far. I really do appreciate it, and I hope I'll see you in my next video. Bye!